So collaboration between the different actors is extremely important, and I'm really glad that we've got someone who's got some experience of bringing everyone, all the actors together. James Cameron is here.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for allowing me to speak in English. I have been following proceedings today, thanks to AI, which is remarkable, let's face it. It's an amazing innovation. It doesn't do humor very well, I have to say. It doesn't quite pick up jokes, and it doesn't quite pick up the sense of energy that comes from a dialogue between contested views. But it is a remarkable thing in itself, and we'll probably refer to its force in dealing with the sustainability issue. I did promise the organizers that I would try my best to do some kind of synthesis of the day, having listened in to all the different sessions, or most of them as I possibly could. And that I would do that, but I'd bring my own frame. And the frame that I'm bringing comes from one of the several enterprises I've had a part in creating, an organization that I founded with others in 2002 called Climate Change Capital, which was a pioneer organization and really the first of its type, focused on aggregating capital through asset management to invest in the solutions, but also advising on what was then really the early stages of the renewable energy boom and other types of technological solution to the climate change problem. And it did what it said. It was climate change capital. But what we wanted to display was that in doing this work, we had a mission, and that mission was to create wealth worth having. And that phrase stuck. It became a kind of mantra. And we discovered it translated quite well into other languages, including Chinese, where we did a lot of our investing. And I want to use that frame still, because I think it's relevant. And it's relevant because each of those words matters. And wealth is something more than money. We can talk accurately about the wealth of nations, as Adam Smith did many years ago, but he used that phrase in its full moral, philosophical sense, not in a narrow economic or financial sense. So if you allow me that frame, and I'll come back to it as we go along, I've picked out 3 words to represent 3 themes that I've picked up during the course of the day. One of them is innovation, another is connection, and a third is security. Let's start with innovation. Lots of conversation during the course of the day about innovation, but not just technology innovation, not just the innovation that comes through science, technology, and investment in new things and new processes, but innovation in thinking. Good presentations, interesting presentations that are essentially philosophical, about rethinking our place in the world, rethinking our connection to a set of values that we might need to adopt more obviously in order to deal with sustainability and sustainable development matters. So innovation in public policy, in the design of regulatory instruments, in the types of intervention we make in an economy in order to deliver these public goods associated with sustainable development. And maybe particularly the area I've spent most of my working life focused on, which is climate change, a problem of such scale and complexity and range and diversity that one has to be humble about the ways in which you intervene with the various types of power that you have, whether you're a government or a board of directors or a civil society organization or an academic. So innovation broadly conceived, but maybe particularly the kind of innovation that accelerates a transformation. Now we know that in the world of computing power, the world of chips, the world of solar panels, batteries, digital demand-side management, mobile phones, perhaps a classic example, the exponential is at work. And a lot of people don't really get or have a feel for what the exponential means. And what it means for decision makers is things move really fast, and sometimes faster than you've managed to cope with. There was an interesting survey in one of the panels today about when the audience felt that Switzerland would be a zero-carbon economy. And it was quite long-dated. The largest percentage was associated with 2075. One thing I'll suggest to you, having worked in this field and working closely with innovators, I would suggest to you that when the exponential is at work, it's dangerous to anticipate that length. That probably the demand for fossil fuels will drop dramatically when it does. I can't tell you when that is. I'm not a trader. I'm not going to bet for it. But one senses that when that demand ceases, and it's currently flattening, we could talk about why that might be, it will fall rapidly. So when thinking about technology and innovation in particular, you've got to factor in the exponential. And the exponential is our friend here because the climate change problem is a non-linear problem which is escaping us. We have to catch up. So innovation is the way to do that, but innovation in the setting where you aren't wholly reliant upon the technology innovation, you're also innovating in public policy, in business model, in social organization. Because you need all of that, and you need to focus on the spaces between disciplines in order to build the capacity to create the wealth worth having that we should aspire to. Okay, innovation. The second area that I think is compelling, has emerged through lots of conversations today, is connection. And obviously they're related to, because one could talk about connectivity in a very technological way. And many conversations have involved data, data capture, data visualization, using data in a different way, data that can empower different decision making, data that can pull together technologies. So, of course, we are now talking much more about the connection between renewable generation, storage, electric vehicles, demand-side management, grid management, billing, how to bill very precisely the customer that uses these electrons at this time in this place, rather than generalized bills sent on approximations. We have the technology to do all of that now, to integrate these systems, tremendous advances, but sometimes the regulatory framework's not there. We actually can't do the things that are technologically possible because we're not allowed to yet. The regulatory framework is still situated in a previous era with different technologies, with a different base to the economy, with a different base to the energy system. So building connectivity in that sense is vitally important, and we're doing it, but we need to hurry up. Building connectivity in a different sense was also displayed in some of the presentations. The need, the absolute necessity to cooperate, to build different types of leadership that is more cooperative, more aware of the connections between one discipline and another, between companies in a supply chain, between countries. A very good presentation earlier about the Sustainable Development Goals and the necessity to cooperate at a global level to deal with them. It's hard, and it's got harder recently with the geopolitics of nationalism, the contest over resources. But it's essential. I spent, years and years and years doing international negotiations. I know their limitations. I built a coalition of small island states in the climate negotiations, and frankly, it's exasperating. But it's also a necessary process to go through. We can innovate there, believe me. We can break bits off and build coalitions of interest that can act more decisively, can implement, can use legal regimes to make big ideas more enforceable. I'm all in favor of that. But connectivity, connection, convergence, cooperation, these are some of the themes I've heard today, and they're essential. The last one is security. We have to face the uncomfortable fact that we have a war on our boundaries in Europe. We have to think of energy security and climate security and peace and security in the same way. We are increasingly going to have to invest in a dual-purpose manner. If we want to build a more resilient system in the energy system, electrifying almost everything in our economy, that system has got to be resilient in a cybersecurity sense, because it will be and is currently under attack. So let me round this off with a parting shot. If you're really serious about creating wealth worth having, if you have a sense of wealth and prosperity that has real sustainability at its heart, you have to make decisions that have some kind of connection with the next generation. And I take my role, as someone who's been doing this for a long time, very seriously. I believe I should be in service to the generation that follows. So that if I think about the next generation in everything I do, it's a good reference point. You will be much more likely to create wealth worth having if there is an intergenerational element, at the very least to the way you approach problems, the way you listen to the generation that is going to be most affected by our success or failure at dealing with these vital sustainability questions, whether it's in climate change or water security or natural capital. And maybe that's the last innovation perhaps we should dwell on when we think about what wealth might mean. Wealth for the next generation has got to in some way include the value of nature, of natural capital, of the systems that support life, not just the increments of economic value that we've currently measured. And the good news is, and partly because of the technology innovation we've had, we can do that. We can take a very big idea like natural capital and we can measure it. We've now got eDNA, we've got low-level satellites that can do remote sensing and very close monitoring of what's going on in living systems. We can track methane, we can measure virtually everything in a way that can be attached to a model that could be applied to financing, could be applied to decision making. And that gives me a sense of optimism that it's going to be possible to deal with these very big complex problems in a meaningful and thoughtful way, and that there should be some feeling of progress associated with the kind of event we're at, and you should be able to leave here and think about what you're going to do tomorrow that will implement these ideas. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
James, thank you so much for that. I really want to pick up on two things that you mentioned. First of all, the generational bit, and then the politics bit, because I know that you've been an advisor to the UK government, to the government of the City of London. So why don't we kick off with that? Because there's so much going on in politics right now in your home country, in the UK. There's a new government. But what we see in so many parts of Europe, also in other parts of the world, is that green parties, which saw the big green wave just a couple years ago, 5 years ago, they're now losing support. We have a graph to show you what's happened to some of the green parties after they joined the government. In Germany, we saw a little bit of a spike and then a big drop-off. What happened? Why are the green parties in such a big crisis? Is it just because of the change of the times? Is it a different sentiment, or have they made too many mistakes?
My view is that there are several reasons. They vary jurisdiction to jurisdiction. It's quite hard to generalize. In some instances, it might depend very much on the political system, how votes are counted, how you win a majority. I think in some instances, the ideas were stolen by other parties.
Or were they just smart in adopting
they
what
adopted
works?
them. I mean, stolen, adopted, doesn't matter. That ideas that resonated well with particular audiences were picked up and used, and in some cases, quite rapidly turned into legislation or public policy processes. So that's, you could argue that's a success. That's a political process that's led to an outcome that a green supporter can feel proud of. Sometimes the difference between campaigning and governing is stark. It feels much harder to govern than to campaign for something, especially if you form part of a government that's got to deal with all kinds of other problems that perhaps your campaigning wasn't addressing. Right? So now, individual politicians can transcend that. There are very good green politicians that have learned how to be good ministers. But it's not a given that if you've achieved electoral success with a mission-driven agenda, that you will also be good at managing all the other things that come with the burden of decision-making in a government. And then, let's face it, we've had a period of time where there's been a very powerful counterforce to many of the arguments made, not just by the, if you like, the environmental component of a Green Party's agenda, but some of the aspects of internationalism that's gone with it. Because we've had, in many jurisdictions now, in many countries, a reaction against globalization, in favor of a certain type of economic nationalism, in favor of cultural identity, separating, are you for or against? And in those contexts, yes, in some parts of the world, there has been a backward step on behalf of those enterprises in politics who have argued for that combination of environmentalism and internationalism.
Mm-hmm. The new Prime Minister in the UK, Sir Keir Starmer, can he re-establish some of the credentials that were lost under the Tories?
Yes, I think that you saw how quickly the British government acted to present a positive agenda on climate change, and they did something which many jurisdictions have done, which is to make a clear connection between dealing with the climate change problem and industrial strategy and economic development and jobs in parts of the country that have suffered as a result of economic decline. It's a very deliberate effort to find a pathway that did not alienate those who are going to be asked to make a transition, and to find more winners than losers in the transition, but also to be clear about direction, right? We are not going to resile from, in the UK, we have legally binding obligations to manage our carbon budgets, a success from a previous government, but in truth, the management of the politics of transition is extremely demanding. And I thought that they did a pretty good job of setting out their stall in the first week and making it very clear, this is where we're going, and we're going to take as many people as we can with you, but if you're not with this agenda, by all means protest, but that's where we're going.
All right. Now that I've asked you about Sir Keir Starmer, you know what's going to come next, right?
Yes.
The big one, November, Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He warned he might repeal the IRA, the big bill that really, Inflation Reduction Act, but it was all about climate. What happens if he gets back into the White House? Is everything lost in terms of the climate efforts?
There's so many ways to answer this. I spent a lot of my working life either in the US or working with, I was counsel to a big US law firm for many years. I've been going backwards and forwards there for a long, long time. And the whole world is waiting on that result. And not just those who care about climate or work on clean energy or whatever. It really is pivotal. And the gulf could not be wider between the alternatives. I would say to those who are anxious about a Trump administration, a few things. There's no doubt that it's part of the agenda that an incoming Trump government, with now a much more organized group around him, to strip out as much reference to climate change as possible throughout the entirety of the civil service, to take away all the incentives they can get their hands on.
But by doing that, he might also endanger some of the jobs. And there were a lot of jobs that were created in red states.
Absolutely. If you look at where the money from the IRA has gone, a lot of it has gone to red states. Look, there's a very good team at Yale that works on climate communications, Anthony Leserowitz and colleagues. And they do a great job of categorizing the way the US population responds to these issues. And so much of it is to do with what questions you ask, how you ask the question. You can see huge levels of support for renewable energy, for example, if you don't mention climate change, and including in all the red states. If you look at Texas, for example, massive increase in the amount of renewable energy. There are red states that have disproportionately benefited from IRA money, and it's going to be hard to take that away.
Absolutely.
The other thing is that, let's be brutally frank about it, Donald Trump doesn't know nor care about this topic. He really doesn't. He's not going to spend any time on it personally. It'll be up to others to do the work. And the work of dismantling is going to face a lot of reaction against it. It's very easy to have rhetorical flourishes about getting rid of this and the other. It's much harder to actually do. And there's an awful lot invested in a clean energy economy now in the US, which they're not going to take away. The other thing that has happened in the 30-odd years I've worked on this topic is that the moral argument for dealing with climate change still exists, but the economic case is made for many of the solutions that we know about. And fossil fuels will never be competitive again in the making of an electron in the United States of America. Never. Right? It will always be cheaper to make an electron from solar or wind, or it will be cheaper to make it, store it, and use it. Much more efficient system than relying upon fossil fuels. And we have, obviously, in America now, there's a very significant fossil fuel industry. Of course there is, oil, gas, coal, but it will not be able to make electrons cheaper than the alternatives.
Probably not. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, and it was also somewhat included in your call for action, the generational debate. Yeah. And it's quite interesting that you have actually started a podcast with your, I believe, granddaughter?
My goddaughter.
Goddaughter.
My goddaughter, Daisy. Yeah, no, this is, okay, so many of you will have had family conversations, conversations at work, conversations where you sense real tension between generations. Right, the younger generation saying, you caused this problem for us, we've got to fix it. Why should I listen to you? Older generation saying, why are you blocking roads with Just Stop Oil campaigns? There is real tension there.
Is your goddaughter one of those?
No, but so my goddaughter Daisy, in some sense, her first bit of job experience is working with me. Actually, much of our connection has been through music, going to music festivals together. So our conversation is a warm conversation amongst people who care about each other. It's not deliberately adversarial. But it's called Fossil versus Future, and I'm the fossil, she's the future.
Makes sense.
But we've all experienced these conversations where somebody, often the older person, challenges the younger person with a phrase, which I don't know whether there's an exact match in Swiss Deutsch, but in English it's what about? And it's often passive-aggressive. What about China? Oh, what about nuclear? What about? And it's meant to force you into some kind of, to back off a little bit, or to come up with an answer. So we thought we would take a few what abouts and just talk about them in a very even-handed way and try and supply people with some information they can go and look at afterwards. Not to be too didactic, not to be too aggressive in our arguments, but to just have a conversation between generations. Mm-hmm. And the basic principle is, we will not find the solutions to these complex problems fast enough if we waste energy fighting between generations. Let's open ourselves up to the possibility that there are younger folk who might know better what the answer is. I sometimes see this, because I do quite a lot of work either advising boards or finding people to go on boards. You can ask yourself this really, who is more likely to try hardest to find the answer to a complex sustainable development problem or a climate problem? Someone who's got the rest of their life facing this, or someone who's reached the top, is my sort of age, but maybe has never had to ask themselves how to fix these problems in the past. That's not how they got there, right? They got there by solving other problems. So I like the idea of accelerating the responsibility for decision-making into the hands of those who are younger. And the only way you do that is by talking to them in a language that is mutually understanding.
And James, luckily, we've got one of these very, very active young generational leaders, a social entrepreneur with us. Her name is Melati Wijsen. We've got a microphone for her. She's in the audience.
Great.
I hope she still is. Oh, there she is.
Great.
Why don't you join us on stage for a little bit, just for 2 or 3 minutes? Because she, James, I don't know if you know her, but she is a prime example of the younger generation who is so active in making this world a better place.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Melati, great to have you.
Thank you.
I think, Melati, you would agree with us in when we say that, hey, the collaboration, the conversation between different generations, it's so important. But we always, maybe create this big divide between the two generations. What do the two generations, or the different generations, what do you have in common? Where do you see common ground?
Oh, this is a good one. And first of all, it's great to be back. I was last year here at Sustainable Switzerland and said hi to a couple familiar faces. But as a full-time changemaker and someone who started Changemaking at 12 years old, I have nearly half of my life, more than half of my life, involved in this space. And I couldn't agree more when you said about intergenerational collaboration is key, because we won't solve the problems with the same thinking that created it. So that's where I think the strengths are when we come together, but what's the common ground?
I hope there is common ground.
I do think there is, and it starts with intention. And there's different ways of how we implement this intention, but I do feel that the more we learn about the problem in these spaces, whether it's at COP or conferences like this or different company annual meetings, the intention is there more and more. The difference, I think, is where we need to see more implementation of these intentions, because we all know we want a world that we can be proud of, but how do we get there?
So one of the things that occurred to me in conversations that led to this podcast is that very often not knowing why not is quite powerful. I think that the first organizations I started, the coalition I helped to build with the small island states in the climate negotiations, if I had known more, I wouldn't have done that, because it's not supposed to be possible. Yeah. So I quite like the idea of opening up, especially as in the conversation between generations, possibilities that would have seemed impossible, but with the right intention, you can do things that are not supposed to be possible. And I think intention is key, but also celebrate a certain amount of naivety. Why not?
Oh, definitely. And I think that's the thing that I thank my 12-year-old self every day for, knowing nothing better than why not? It's the right thing to do. And I think that's where the power of Gen Z, we see circularity instead of linear. For us, it's only possibility and not the challenge. Imagine what we could accomplish if we focused just the same amount of time and energy that we do discussing the problems and the why we cannot, and we channeled that into what can we do right now if we work together. This room in itself, the amount of people with the talent, the skills, the resources, because yes, there is enough money out there to turn things around, but the intention and the political willingness is what we need for that implementation to happen.
And that was a perfect call for action. I want to close it on this very positive note. Let's stay this optimistic. Thank you so much to the both of you. Really, really appreciate your input and your insights as well. Big round of applause.
Thank you.